This is Modern Gaming Culture. This series will attempt to highlight the phenomenon of PC, console, and mobile gaming and bring to light all of its phenomenal aspects. Let's take a dive together into the world of modern gaming and take apart its structure. Now, here's your host, Rotimi Osagi. All right, this is Modern Gaming Culture. This is episode 27, Modern Gaming Culture. So, continuing with unpacking what I consider the times we be living in, which is internet dark age and the emergence of what I call the internet bully. So, I'm going to just start with some housekeeping. So, this is episode 27. So, if you've really been listening and trying to take in and really, discover, what I've been talking about here, you know, you should have, first, going back to episode 1, right, and listen in order from there, and also, really, try to take apart what I'm saying and really try to apply it. This is not about, just passively listening, right? This show's about gaming, right? And gaming has really taken this, it's taken this persona of being this like passive form of, you know, entertainment, right? um, Due to just how gaming has really been shaped in the Western society, right, which is ultimately the hub of you know innovation, etc. Right, and this show is about really alleviating a lot of that damage that's really been done. Call the damage is really giving too much credit to of course the perpetrators of this mischief, right? But this show is about alleviating that, right? We have a lot of stuff in the pipeline, and um, part of you know what we do is steering people in the right direction, right? That's what culture does, right? And so, uh, as much as the show's about gaming, right, this show's also about right and wrongs, right? Understanding what that means, right, and applying it to your life, right? So, you know, started doing, you know, sort of like updates, announcements, etc. Right. Again, this show is almost taking a life of its own, right? In the sense that, you know, um, this has been something where, I'm not unfamiliar with internet publishing, right? And so, I've done a lot of projects, and um, so I try to integrate a lot of what I did in those projects into products that I'm working on, right? And so, um, but at the same time, right, this is something where I really am trying to reach a specific audience, right? This is not necessarily something I'm doing out of an intellectual curiosity, for example, right? And so I really want to try to tailor it to the people who I'm trying to reach, right? And so, understanding that they need a light hand, right? They bust their ass day in, day out, right? And um really trying to cater to that dynamic, right? So I've been sort of um keep people up to date with sort of um you know things I want to do on the show, right? I want to do deck profiles, right? I want to do um team profiles, right, for VGC, right? Not gonna I don't think I want to do anything related to, um, you know, like, for example, um, you know, doing something like a VOD review for like League of Legends, for example, something like that, right? Um, I don't think that's very productive because League of Legends is a game. Frankly, it's not that good. If you've played enough League of Legends, you understand that the game's not that good. It's pretty much a clone of Dota 2, right? And Dota is still, when it comes to profitability, is definitely still more profitable of a game. They have larger prize pools, right? Generally, play the players more security, etc. Right, more longevity, right? And so again, League of Legends is small potatoes compared to Dota. But again, right? You really want to assess sort of what's taking place in the West, right? You're not going to, play 1,000 games of Dota and somehow you're going to be able to figure that out because um, people who are playing Dota are a lot more sophisticated generally. Obviously, giving them too much credit, but these are not people who are necessarily just they have some sort of high power PC for school just because they have more money than they know what to do with, right? Not even because they actually are techies, right? And they're just like, you know what, I have like 2 terabytes, so I can just download whatever I want. So there's all these free games. Oh, League of Legends, right? You don't have that with Dota 2. Pretty sure you have to pay for Dota 2 as well. Um, it's been a while since I've even touched the Dota, so I don't even remember. But it's and you also have to have Steam, right, installed. It's a much larger process than just downloading League of Legends, right, and having it on your. It's not even 60 gigs on your hard drive, right, and so if you're really going to understand sort of what's taking place in the West, right, when it comes to respect to, for example, gaming, right, you really need to take it from the lens of League of Legends. So I don't necessarily think that it's even important because, again, with a lot of these, like, again, right, when League of Legends was really forming, right, you know, um, it was a lot, the game was a lot less, more condensed, right? And so, when it came to really try to eke out your own way, it couldn't be done. It was impossible. And so, generally, when people were doing mischievous things, it was very obvious. Everyone knew what they were doing, and they got punished. Now you have the situation where because the game's a lot more spread out, right? The ability to recognize and dispatch mischief is a lot more difficult, right? And so as a result, people are just deciding just not to get sucked in, and people don't have any like. There's no incentive to even get sucked in, anyways. You're not going to get better at the game. You're not going to climb faster, right? In fact, you're going to find you're going to climb slower, right? And you're going to apply a lot more meaning to the games, right? And so they're going to have a lot more of a impact on you if you get sucked in, right? I'm not necessarily apologizing for people who don't get sucked in because you should get sucked in because that's how you learn, right? And so I'm not necessarily apologizing for them, but I'm saying that there's not even an incentive to really um, even try. And so with respect to that, why would I even try to do, you know, content related to League of Legends? Right. I've done a series already. And so that's done with, right? And, to actually even, hold out any hope that, you know, um, it'll get any better is, I mean, good luck is all I can say, right? Um, so, you know, again, with a lot of these things that I want to be doing, right? These things require resources, right? For um, the deck profile series, right? I was doing that, with a format. I think that was, block F, right? And so, again, uh, I was pretty well prepared to do that series, right? I had opened a lot of products for those formats, And so when it was time that I decided, I'm going to be doing this, right? It wasn't necessarily sweat off my back, right? In fact, it was long overdue, right? And so um, to do that again, especially with how I've really taken stock, realize, I need to, open up 10 times as much product I've been open up, right? So imagine you just wake up and you realize that, you need to be opening, you need to be spending, 10 times as much money as you've been spending, right? And so this is something where um, you can't even really understand what it is because again, most people they have more money than they know what to do with, right? And they're, saving it for a rainy day, right? And so um, they don't even really it doesn't really come across them that, maybe they need to um take stock and assess how they spend money, right? You know, this is just basically about people living purposeless lives, right? To get a little metaphysical here, right? People generally don't have purpose that drives their life, right? Um, you know, um, they are driven by, um, you know, greed, right? If you're lucky, people are driven by greed, right? Generally, you find people don't even have a drive. People just want to be told what to do, right? Which is what this series is generally about, right? I've been, using this description for the audience's consideration, right? And you know, this is sort of what I've been hinging this series upon, right? And I don't really feel like it's even necessary to, pretty much expand on this, right? Because again, I understand the people I'm trying to reach. I understand they need a light hand. And, it's not necessarily something where I should, you know, um, try to eke out some sort of, very profound, powerful, hard hitting, impactful, you know, insights. Right. When I understand that these people just generally want a light hand and, they're busting their ass day in and day out and they don't necessarily need a heavy hand. Right. So, um, with that out of the way, I want to sort of continue unpacking this. So, what you find, right, is that um, find that generally, despite, um, advancements made, right, whether it be in your personal life or in your social relationships, right, generally find that, and, people who really are immersed in gaming, right, are obviously um, kind of special instances when it comes to this, but you generally find that you need to really put a lot of people, particularly in their place, right? People who feel like they have somehow gained some sort of position in society, right? And as a result, have been, awarded certain privileges, right? You know, um, I'm going to sort of try to interject a lot of different other things that I'm going to be talking about on the show as well. So what you find with society these days is, we have a more global society now, right? The West is not necessarily, of course, right, with respect to, the people who, lived here before, the British and the French and the Spanish came and colonized the West, right? Um, and of course they still occupy this place, right? But of course now they share, you know, occupation with, you know, what is now America, right? Um, you know, as a result, right, we've generally been immersed into society where prosperity rules pretty much, right? In the sense that essentially things are awarded to people based on how comfortable their way of life is, essentially, right? So you have this sort of generally in business is referred to as the 80-20 principle, right, where 80% of the work is done by 20% of the people, right? And so what you generally have is you have this large portion of society, right, particularly the male population, right, who is basically at the beck and call of, this very small population, which is, the women who are, really exercising their sex drive to seek a partner, right? And so they've essentially just been given this swath of people to, really, you know, pick apart, right? And, you know, it's basically created a situation where, the greatest among them, right, are, really pressed to um, receive any sort of, relief in any way, shape, or form, right? Where you're really, burning candle at both ends, right? And, find no relief, right? And so, of course, this is not something that's by accident, right? The powers that be want it to be like this, right? And again, right, if you've been listening, right, you've been really trying to dig deeper, right? Really listen to what I'm trying to say, right? And I talk about things like, conducting internet oversight, right? Participating in the gaming arena, right? How, people who participate in game culture, they bust their asses day in and day out, right? And so this is not something where you're going to be able to just come to here and you're just going to be able to receive everything that you need, right? You need to really listen to what I'm saying and really try to integrate it, right? And really look into what I am, talking about here, right? So, you know, um, so what it's really created is this power vacuum, right? Where, people who are really not even activated, right, are really sucking the you know capacity for societal advancement um through their inaction, right? Whereas they're also um sucking the attention from the most um influential among them when it comes to the female population, right? And so it's a really interesting scenario because you know um if you've really dug deep and really studied sort of dynamics from a lot of different cultures, traditions, etc., right, schools of thought, you know, you find that these can open very dangerous portals, right, where you know um, people are really encountering things that they really can't understand, right, and these are things that the greatest among them really have insight on, but they can't even really come together and sort of take these dynamics apart, right? Driving a wedge in society, in other words, right? Which is, of course, part of the plan, right? This is not necessarily something that needs to be, you know, elaborated on in the sense of, oh, somehow we need to really, this is where a lot of people's anxiety comes from, right? Is they realize that, the powers that be are trying to drive a wedge in society, right? So they can maintain their power, right? But they also don't realize how to get um, how to go about you know um come together, right? And so you know this generally is the role that the internet bully has really positioned themselves to you know um take on, right? So they're further preventing this bond even when things seem so fine and amazing that still it's not able to really be overcome, right? And generally, what we find with this internet bully is, they're generally nobody in the sense that they're not anybody who actually needs to be found, right? Because, if you really understand that, when it comes to a lot of these things, right, people don't even need to be given the time of day. These people just need to get put down, right? And you can really interpret that however you like, right? But so it's something where you realize, these are people that don't necessarily need a heavy hand on them. They don't need a light hand on them. They don't need any hand on them, right? So that's really the hurdle that needs to be overcome. And it's not necessarily a hurdle that is going to be overcome through anything that you can really interpret as, normal or conventional, right? These are more metaphysical issues that need to be dealt with, right? From a perspective of mind, right? Um, and from a perspective of accomplishing a mission, right? You know, I think one thing that generally people find is that you know, again, with the millennial generation, right, generation that came after the baby boomers, right? You know, these are people who were very nomadic in their vocations, right? These are people that didn't necessarily um, establish themselves one way or another, right? We're always ready to change professions, etc. But now you find with Gen Z, right, really reaching that sort of vocational age, right? You know, now they're taking that idea from the millennials and they're taking it one step further. Now they're like, we're not even going to conduct the nomadic vocational style that the millennials have done. We're just gonna get our bosses so pissed off that they're actually just gonna do it for us, right? So they're actually trying to do this sort of very subtle, and it's not even very subtle. It's a very overt powder keg that they're trying to ignite, right, between their perceived, authorities, right? Um, and essentially, this character, which I've been describing, right, through this description that I've been given for your consideration, essentially the character who ultimately is serving as the sort of like you know um like pulley system, right? To really facilitate the possibility of that occurring, right? When really, ultimately, if you really understand kind of, you know, what this leads to, they're not going to get that any way, shape, or form, right? That's not how anything works, right? You're going to get, societal decay, economic suicide, economic instability, right? You know, when it comes to really taking apart things such as, for example, the pandemic, right? Um, you understand that, these social, these people who determine, the way society will go, right? These bureaucrats, right? They were happy with basically shutting down society because the way things were going, society was going to shut down anyways, right? And so they were just like, well, again, right? We don't really care, if you lose your way of life because it was going to be lost anyways, right? So again, this is things that you really need to really look into yourself, right? So, you know, I think I'm going to leave it there for the former parties episode, right? Um, that's a lot to really take in. So, I think I'm just going to leave it there. This episode has been Modern Gamer Culture. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you.